Uh, Welcome to Climate First 13th annual meeting. And we got the okay to record the meeting as well as take screenshots. And I would also ask people if they could mute themselves before the speakers start talking. It'll be obvious when they start talking. Um, but first of all, I would like to recognize members of Climate First Board of Directors. And we have four people on the board, including myself. And also Fred Krimgold, who was in the meeting. Sasan Dagon is also here in the meeting, as you know, and Alex Lugo is here too. So other than Alex, who joined us about 6 months ago, the others have been with us for numerous years, especially Sasan. Sasan, I think you've been a member of the board for maybe 9, 10 years.
10 years, that's right.
10 years. Yeah. I remember when I met you. Boy, that was a long time ago. Um, and lots have happened since then, obviously, in this country. And not all bad. Um, and due to the number of people we have on the call, if people could introduce themselves in the chat, that'd be fine. That'd be great. So we might as well get started with our keynote speaker. So I will read her bio. And our keynote speaker is Iyla Shornstein. She's with the Center for Climate Integrity. And Ms. Shornstein is the political director at the Center for Climate Integrity, where she oversees the organization's state and local political and advocacy strategies. Her work is centered on engagement with public officials, on climate accountability, in an attempt to build a strong movement to hold big oil responsible for their devastating lies. Before joining CCI in 2020, Iyla worked on political campaigns at the local, state, and federal level in various states. Iyla holds a degree in environmental policy from Bard College. And this is interesting, where she received the Rachel Carson Award for research quantifying the influence of fossil fuel contributions on congressional voting behavior. I just thought that was really interesting, especially because Ms. Carson spent a lot of time, a lot of her life in the state of Maryland, and she lived here for a long time. Finally, Iyla currently lives in Maine. So Iyla is our keynote speaker, as I said earlier, and she's going to talk about the campaign to stop fossil fuel companies from getting immunity from lawsuits and statutes involving damages from climate amplified natural disasters. Iyla,
Yeah, thank you, Ted. I'm sending you a request to share my screen.
of course. Done.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's see. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ted. I'm thrilled to be here with you all, and especially the opportunity to talk about this issue, which is becoming well, extremely relevant in the last few weeks. So it's good timing here. Yeah, like Ted said, I'm going to talk about some recent efforts by fossil fuel lobbyists to try and get immunity from Congress. But I'm going to do some background on this issue as well, just to put it in some additional context and some background on our organization. So we've been around since about 2017, so we're still somewhat fairly new, under 10 years old. And we have a very, very narrow mission, which is to hold oil and gas companies accountable for their decades of lying about the climate crisis and for all of the costs and damages that we are now experiencing as a result. We do that through supporting strategic litigation that's been brought by communities and attorneys general all over the country. We also run a state legislative program where we are trying to work with different communities to, like, for instance, we have a couple of bills that are related to the insurance crisis and trying to make sure that big oil pays their fair share of the losses that people are experiencing from that as well. So that's just sort of high level what we do as an organization. And like Ted said, like I said, so we're gonna get into much more detail about this, but this is generally what we are fighting back on right now, which is that big oil is directly lobbying both directly to the administration at the highest levels and also to members of Congress to try and get immunity from any laws or lawsuits that would be holding them accountable. And again, I'll go into this in much more detail. But why are they trying to do that, right? I mean, I think one thing that's always kind of interesting is that, of course, why would anyone ask for immunity? Well, you ask for immunity if you've done something wrong. So we know that, and probably most people on this call know that big oil has known that their products would lead to catastrophic climate change. And they've known that information going back to the late 1950s. And I always thought what's interesting is there's been a few studies showing basically modeling what big oil was predicting back decades ago with what has actually happened in terms of global temperature rise. And if you look at those graph lines next to each other, you can't even tell them apart, right? So their predictions were extraordinarily accurate. They even said, like, there's a direct quote of them testifying to Congress. We had some of the best scientists in the world. They did. And so they knew they had a huge amount of information that burning fossil fuels unmitigated would lead to catastrophic consequences. And they use that word catastrophic. And I think that's really important. I mean, they weren't saying, oh, there'll be like, some a little bit of harm. No, they were saying catastrophic, and that's exactly what's happened. Um, and I always thought this quote was also striking. This is from a former scientist at Exxon, but it was not a matter of if there was going to be a problem. It was just a matter of how bad and when it was going to be. And instead of revealing this information to the public, instead of helping lead the transition to clean energy, they, of course, wanted to protect their bottom line. And so the American Petroleum Institute and all of their members and big oil executives launched a multi-million-dollar massive deception campaign. This was starting about in the late 80s. And it continues through this day. It just looks a little different over time. But this was a memo from, I believe, the I think this was 1998. And you can see right here that the goal of this campaign, right? This is like we commonly refer to this as the victory memo because it's one of the most damning pieces of evidence that we've seen be revealed. But really, is that victory will be achieved when average people understand that climate science is just too uncertain to take action on. And that has, of course, been extraordinarily successful. For years, this campaign was really about denying the existence of climate change. But then, when they could really no longer lie about the problem because we're all experiencing it, they started lying about the solutions. And now we have, these campaigns of pretty robust greenwashing initiatives. And that's what we see today, right? It's they're still lying. It just looks a lot different. But also communities everywhere are now paying the price for these lies because we slowed the transition to clean energy, because we delayed climate progress for so many decades. We now are living in a state far worse than we thought we would be, and where communities are now experiencing this in the form of extreme weather, massive wildfires, floods, hurricanes, you name it. With this actually hit really close to home for my family. My brother was one of the many people who lost their home in Altadena last January during the wildfires there, which of course has many, perpetrators of that harm, but big oil is absolutely to blame for, making this much more severe than it otherwise would have been. Um, However, communities are striking back, right? Communities are saying, okay, absolutely not. We should not be bearing 100% of the cost to recover from these extreme weather events. Big oil needs to pay their fair share. So now about 1 in 4 people, and I know that there's a lot of folks in Maryland on this call in the DMV area, but that live in a community that is actually taking big oil to court. And this is very exciting. So you can see this is the sort of the state of play now. But there's dozens and dozens of communities, both cities and counties, as well as 11 attorneys general. And just recently, when was it? I think the last 2 months, I think it's been in 2026, Michigan actually just sued Big Oil as well. And they actually, both Hawaii and Michigan sued in over the last 6 months or so. And the administration actually tried to, they sued both Michigan and Hawaii prior to them filing a lawsuit to try to intimidate them out of filing. Both states' attorneys general said, absolutely not. The harm is far too broad to be afraid of scare tactics. So they filed lawsuits anyway. But in addition to, and I don't have a map of this, but in addition to the lawsuits, probably most folks are aware that there's also a big effort to pass what are being called climate superfund laws, modeled after the National Superfund model. And this is basically a similar approach, very complementary, but is at the state legislative level. And both Vermont and New York have been successful in passing these. And I know that Maryland actually did pass the first part of this bill as well. They're starting with a study bill to try to quantify how much loss and damage the state has experienced. And then the second half would be holding them accountable for those costs. So that's also sweeping the nation right now. However, Big Oil hates this, of course, right? They don't want to pay their fair share. And far even greater than that, they do not want to admit their role in causing all of this harm. So just like the gun industry was successful in getting immunity for the harms that they've caused communities, so too is Big Oil trying to get similar legal protections. Um, so again, too, on the gun industry, because they're really one of the only industries that has been successful in securing immunity. And what this has meant is that communities, people, individuals cannot bring litigation against gun manufacturers to hold them accountable. So it's a really big piece of justice and accountability, and being made whole is really left out of the equation. So a little bit of sort of timeline of what we've seen, because this effort has been imminent for a while, but once Trump was inaugurated and the new Congress came in last January, they really have the formula to make this all happen. So last March, there was confirmation in the Wall Street Journal that Big Oil executives met directly with Trump and his highest level cabinet officials to basically say, we need your help. We need sweeping legal protections from all of these efforts to hold us accountable. So that was sort of about a year ago, the first time we were like, all right, this is really starting to heat up. In June, I think it was 16 Republican attorneys general came together and wrote a letter to Pam Bondi. And basically, you can see some of here, they want to stop these activist funded. They love saying that. They love saying lawfare, but stop these lawsuits. And they specifically say a liability shield, and they compare it right here to the gun manufacturer's successful bid for immunity. And so this was another big moment, right? Okay, now we have the lobbyists themselves asking for it. Now we have a bunch of Republican attorneys general. In July, we saw language. This was in like the appropriations bill that was specific to DC, but they basically tried to the Attorney General for Washington, DC has filed a lawsuit against Big Oil. They tried to get rid of that in the appropriations bill for DC. Luckily, that was unsuccessful. Fast forward, and throughout the fall, we saw confirmations on their lobbying disclosure reports. So there's been a lot of, and there was a Federalist Society. I always say Federal Socialists instead of Federal Society, which are wildly different things. So I have to pause before I say that. But Federalist Society did a big panel where they even said they said we as the oil industry, we have to win every single one of these lawsuits, but the plaintiffs only have to win one. So they are very, very, very afraid of these lawsuits. So, we did see a lot of activity heating up over the fall. In January, the American Petroleum Institute came out with their agenda, their priorities for 2026. Right at the top of their agenda was stopping, you can see it highlighted here, stopping extreme climate liability. And they specifically call out the climate superfund bills as well as litigation. So renewed effort starting really, really strong on their part right at the beginning of this year. Just about 2 weeks ago, this became even more real, where during the Pam Bondi hearing, there was a back and forth exchange with Rep. Harriet Hageman out of Wyoming. She's actually the one that replaced Liz Cheney. But she basically confirmed that she is working with her colleagues to draft legislation that would grant big oil immunity. So now, of course, we've been kind of gearing up for the last year, but now it's game time. And just before I sort of get into what that campaign looks like to push back, I do want to kind of just have a grounding moment here where the majority of people out there, they understand that climate change is costing them a lot of money. And, this is like a gross summary, but when we poll people all over the country, when we poll specific communities, when we do national polls, people understand that climate change costs money, and they also think that big oil should pay their fair share. We also specifically asked, about this concept of immunity. And you can see here that the vast majority of voters don't think that big oil should be getting immunity, which, is arguably common sense. But it's also good to see that data confirmed in the poll. This is politically popular, right? Or politically unpopular, I should say. So, communities are once again fighting back, and we have been gearing up for this because we've been monitoring this since 2018. We knew this would be a threat because the writing's on the wall, right? This is an industry that has caused tremendous harm, like tobacco, like opioids, like guns. So we knew that there would be renewed attempts each year, each time they get a Congress that will work with them on this. So, but it's never been as real as it is right now. So about 6 months ago, well, I guess more than that, over the summer, we started ramping up our efforts to monitor the situation. And we have built out both a national, oh, is it my echo? I don't know if folks are hearing that or if it's just me.
Yeah, I'm definitely hearing an echo. If everyone could please mute themselves, that would really help.
Thank you. So communities are pushing back, and we've done some big sign-on letters in the past and lots of other actions, but now we're coming together, renewing all those efforts and making this a very, very big issue. Interestingly, and I just thought this was interesting to note, back in 2020, the DNC actually put out their recommendations for the 2020 Democratic Party platform. I actually don't think they put out recommendations since. Someone correct me if you know better, but I believe that's the last time they issued like a specific report. Here are recommendations. And you can see right here, we oppose fossil fuel industry bailouts, and we also oppose legislation to shield polluters or reduce their liability. So there's some really good fodder and foundation to build upon where some folks in different very official places have said in the past that they oppose this. So we're trying to kind of harness some of that as well. But this is what it's looking like now. There's a big national effort, and then there's some very state-specific efforts. On the national front, I mean, this really is a 50-state campaign, right? I mean, this affects everyone. No matter where you are experiencing the impacts of climate change. And we want to make sure that we're preserving access to justice for anyone. Even if right now the politics don't work for someone in Idaho, they might in the future. And also, Idaho is not going to be exempt from the impacts of climate change. So we want to make sure that we're protecting access to justice for anyone, anywhere. Some of the national kind of campaign tactics, and I'm happy to share links to any and all of this, but there's some national petitions that are out there and a bunch of other groups in addition to us. We're all working together to make this happen. But there's some big petitions. There are national sign-on letters, and that's both for elected officials and for organizations. And we do also, and I welcome anyone here to join, we are doing a monthly organizing call on this issue, which Ted has joined us in the past on. Our next call is March 12th at 3 p.m. Eastern, and I can send the registration link for that. But that's where we're really coming together each month to be like, all right, this is the next push. This is the next thing we want everyone focusing on. We're trying to sequence that out with what we see happening on the Hill. There's also a very concerted effort happening in a bunch of states. There are some states that have very organized campaigns, other states that are doing stuff here and there, and other states where some of that they might need a little bit of a push, or they're just starting to focus in on this issue. We saw in Washington State, there was really amazing. They did a petition with this unbelievable petition delivery, where they actually had like street art and all of this kind of amazing press. We're seeing similar efforts in Connecticut. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. Or not, maybe. In Connecticut, New Jersey, Minnesota, Illinois, Washington, Oregon, California is doing some great organizing. And so right now, it's a lot of like grassroots. There are sign-on letters, there are petitions, there are tools to call on Congress. But how this fits into the greater picture is, we found out they're drafting this language, so we're now trying to like get, um, bump up the urgency with which people are taking action. But we're also now headed towards, in about a little over a month, April recess, meaning that a lot of members of Congress are going to be home. So that provides a great opportunity to try and schedule lots of in-district meetings with staff to do different kinds of events and rallies, phone banking, you name it. We're using all the tactics that are out there. And there are some groups that have come out with call tools. There are some groups like Sierra Club has a really great LTE generator where it like basically gives you some model language and it identifies all the different outlets in your area. So there's a lot of really good organizing happening around this. But in those specific states, there's concerted campaigns. Oops. But like I said, that doesn't mean just because the state's not listed doesn't mean there's not activity, or it might just need someone to really start the organizing process there. And we're happy to help with any of this. Um, We also put out a big toolkit and it has everything in it and we are constantly adding to it. It's one link, so we can kind of change it on the back end and folks will always have that new version of it. But it's got a lot of background and sort of talking points, how to talk about this issue. It has sample op-eds and LTEs. We actually just added resolution language so that cities and counties can pass resolutions urging Congress to oppose these immunity efforts. But there's also one pagers just about the issue. There's postcards. We have a lot of folks organizing postcard parties to their members of Congress. There's banners. And honestly, if there's anything that's not there that folks think would be helpful for organizing, we'll just help you make it. So we're taking a lot of people's suggestion to just build this toolkit out. And soon we will have a website too. We're just building it in the process of building it, where it'll hopefully be just one clearinghouse of all the information that people can go to find out how to self-organize or join into existing organizing efforts. Um, so few calls to action that we're pushing right now, and this is sort of our push between mid-February and mid-March, is trying to drum up as much signatures as we can on the national petition. And there's a toolkit that is out there to help promote that. Because we want to culminate this in a really awesome petition delivery. We want to do a big press conference and rallies and things of that nature. There's also, like I said, in conjunction with this, a sign-on letter, and that can be signed by elected officials. And there's also one for organizations. And I put it's all in one big link, which makes it really easy. So you can go into the link and say, okay, I am an organization in Washington State, and then you can get to that letter. And then lastly, if folks have ever been to Netroots, which is a really wonderful organizing conference, often for digital organizing, which is actually really not what I do, but it's a really great, kind of just gathering of lots of different organizers. Did submit a panel to talk about this issue really broadly, actually, where we would have a representative of the gun what am I calling it? The gun safety movement to talk about that 2005 law. Like basically what happens when immunity is granted and what does that mean for survivors who are seeking justice? And then also having someone from potentially the opioid movement to say, hey, this is what justice looks like when we don't have immunity. We didn't have to deal with this immunity issue. Although in some ways you could argue that some of the bankruptcy around that did serve some of that. And then someone from this movement right now to say this is what we're actively fighting. You may have also seen too that there are some similar parallel battles to glyphosate and pesticides that are also unfolding right now in Congress as well. So kind of parallel efforts of these industry trying to get immunity. But we would love for folks to vote for that panel because they are opening that up to the public to be able to vote for those panels. And that's what this looks like. The deadline, I think, is March 13th. So those are the big calls to action at the moment: petitions, sign-on letters, Netroots, but on these organizing calls, each month there will be a renewed sort of something new that comes up. So mid-March, we'll be coming with like, here's the next big push. And that next big push is probably going to be a really big focus on April recess. We're trying to do some teletown halls, but really trying to basically just make as many people as we can aware of this and ready to act. So when that language in the bill does drop, we just make this wildly unpopular, especially for Democrats, right? We have to kind of make sure that the Democrats hold the line on this so that they are fighting back against any bill, whether or not it ends up being a standalone bill or just snuck into some other must-pass piece of legislation. The goal right now is to make this very, very politically toxic to vote for, if that makes sense. Um, so I'm happy to go into more detail if folks have questions, but that about sums it up on this effort right now. And I think also the big thing too is in addition to fighting against this, we have to make sure that we're also not dropping. What they want us to do is distract us and make us fight this fight so we don't still work on all of our other really great work trying to hold this industry accountable. So it's really just making a little bit more work for us, but luckily there's a lot of people that are out there ready to meet the moment. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
I thank you, Iyla, so much for that fascinating talk and also the very sharp questions, interesting questions that people asked. The Q&A is always so interesting after a great talk. So thank you so much, Iyla. Um, just want to make sure the recording is back on.
It is. It's all set.
Oh, okay. Thanks. All right. Well, I would like to talk a little bit about Climate First work last year, 2005, and also what we are doing now in 2026. And I will say a lot of it came out of our annual report, which I believe I sent to everybody on this call. So if folks have questions or want sort of a summary of what I'm going to talk about, you'll definitely see it in the annual report. Um, and I think I'll also send it out uh, with Isla's stuff, the toolkit and stuff. I'll send that out with her toolkit to everybody, unless anybody objects. So anyway, going back to early 2025 and thinking about what was going on back then for this talk was somewhat challenging because thinking back and do that yourself. Think back to early 2005. I mean, I was in shock, when the current president, the big, bad, beautiful president, whatever, uh, when he came into office, I just, I was in shock in a lot of ways. I just didn't know how Climate First was going to go forward with a new U.S. president doing everything he could to increase the use of fossil fuels in this country, while at the same time attempting to permanently close the door to anything related to renewable energy. It just seemed inevitable that the climate crisis would worsen dramatically as a result. And of course, as the days and weeks went on, his increasingly authoritarian actions were scary. And of course, they continue into 2006, maybe even worse. But connected actually to the authoritarian issue is interesting because our first major event or real event that we attended was the hands-off rally at the Washington Monument in the nation's capital. And I think some of you were there. Um, it was in early April, and it was one of nearly 1,300 such events around the country on that day. And I don't know if this is factual or not, but I did see in one one newspaper, online newspaper, I think that this hands-off event in last April was the largest organized event to date opposing the new Trump administration's extreme policies and actions. And it occurred like a week after, or less than a week after, U.S. Senator Booker from New Jersey did his 25-hour plus marathon speech. And to me, anyway, those two events sort of symbolize that the organized pushback had finally begun. And now, of course, we've come a long ways from that. But just sometimes the first step is the hardest. And that was really, that gave me some hope when I realized that here we go. Um, the next event that we attended was the No King protest, and it was in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where my wife and I were going for vacation. So we attended that, and again, it just felt good that the opposition to the Trump administration's extremism was continuing. On the face of it, No Kings had nothing to do with climate, and I started to wonder about that. I said, well, should I change the name of Climate First to No Kings First? Um, are we not going to be talking about the climate issue anymore? And then the answer was obvious. So, I mean, if if an oligarch, is in office running this country, there's going to be virtually no money spent on climate issues by the federal government. So, yes, there is room for the climate issue these days, because it's totally related to the authoritarianism that's going on. Um, Also in 2025, we started working on the Wells Fargo campaign, a newly created Wells Fargo campaign. And it really came forth due to Wells Fargo dropping its 2030 and 2050 climate targets. Um, Allegedly, that was under pressure from the new administration that they just said, hey, we're not going to abide by these targets anymore, these climate commitments. And they also engaged in other terrible behaviors, including dropping their commitments to DEI. They engaged in union busting and some other terrible stuff I won't get into. Um, so the campaign came along in part to punish Wells Fargo for dropping their climate goals. And you probably would understand that, oh, well, if a major bank like Wells Fargo dropped their climate goals, the other banks will follow. And that's one big reason this Wells Fargo campaign came into existence. Because if all the big major US banks, the biggest climate polluting banks on earth, basically, the top four, Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and Citibank, if they all dropped their climate targets, the climate crisis would get significantly worse over time. So anyway, during the the Wells Fargo campaign, we got involved in a National Day of Action against Wells Fargo, and we organized a bank walk in DC and went to three different banks, delivering petitions, um, to uh, the person who was running each bank branch, each Wells Fargo bank branch. In September, we got involved in a Petro State tour in Washington, D.C., which was organized by Third Act. And it basically included rallies planned at 4 stops during the tour. Um, and these were most of them were lobbying organizations, fossil fuel lobbying organizations, American Gas Association, the American Petroleum Institute, and Natural Gas Association of America. The fourth organization was Venture Global LNG, which is a company that builds LNG sites around the country, especially in Louisiana. And our argument was during that Petrostate tour was that the work of these three associations, and as well as the company, LNG company, showed that the U.S. was moving towards being a petrostate. And at the time, I wasn't 100% sold on that, but I'm starting to think that that's true. I mean, the fossil fuel companies don't control Washington, D.C., the federal government, but they do have a lot of power. Another part of the Wells Fargo's campaign was the unionization project. And this is fascinating because up until a couple years ago, there were no major U.S. banks that had unions, employees in a union working for them. And then the unionization effort started at Wells Fargo a couple years ago, branch by branch. Um, and I think there's over 600, roughly 600 branches in the country of Wells Fargo. So when I say that about 30 of them are unionized now, doesn't sound like much, but um, it is going to grow, and Climate First is going to continue working on it. We've been to 12 branches and talked to an employee at each branch, making sure it was not the supervisor because they're not in a union, or at least the same union as employees. And we tried to light the spark, to start a union at each one. And I don't know how successful we were, but it was a start. And we're going to continue doing that this year. And now there's also a grassroots unionization effort going on at Chase Bank, which is the biggest climate polluting bank on earth. And I don't know how many branches that they have unionized, but that sounds like a really exciting campaign. Um, in mid-October, we attended the No Kings rally, one of the No Kings rally in Washington, D.C., which another 200,000 people, estimated 200,000 people attended. And at all the No Kings rallies in the U.S. on that day, and also in other countries, there were reportedly 7 million people at these rallies in the U.S. and around the world. Oh, and that was about over 2,700 events in all 50 states on that day. And it was the one in DC was one of the most fascinating rallies I've ever been to in my life. With somebody was dressed up as a Statue of Liberty. There were a lot of children at the event, some in baby carriages, which was fascinating. But mostly I guess the most jaw-dropping sighting that I saw was a protester walking along on stilts. That just blew me away on Constitutional Avenue when I saw that. Yeah, and you'll see the picture in the annual report. Finally, last year, we continued our longstanding work in the Costco Clean Up Your Credit Card campaign. And we canvassed at a Costco warehouse in Maryland 2 straight weekends, trying to get customers of Costco, as well as potential customers, to sign a petition that called on Costco to drop Citibank as its credit card partner if the major bank didn't end its massive climate polluting ways. So, going forward in 2026, we're obviously going to stay glued to the Wells Fargo campaign because we have to continue to punish the lender as much as we can. And that includes trying to unionize an increasing number of branches. And by punishing them, we'll show other banks that, hey, if we drop our climate targets, we might have to worry about the union campaign at our branches, and we don't want that. And also in 2026, and this is exciting, the Costco campaign, we're going to stay with that too, because we believed in that campaign from its very beginning. And there's also really good news. This is super news in the campaign. The main organizer in this Costco campaign has done a lot of research, and she and others came out with a report researching the question, are there options out there where there are climate-friendly financial institutions that can handle the massive amount of credit card business that Costco and other businesses create? And this lead organizer, she's the lead author actually, she discovered that there were. I mean, they're not super, they do invest some in fossil fuels, but nothing like those top four banks, like Citibank, which is Costco's current credit card partner. They provide the credit card to Costco. But there are better options out there. And one of them is American Express. Another one is Credit One Bank. Another one is Synchrony. And there's 5 others. So if we go around to Costco with the report and say, hey, can I speak with your manager? I'm a member of Costco, and we can talk about the better options report, and we can say, could you pass this on to your manager? And the CEO of Costco is definitely going to get copies of this if he hasn't already. I think it's a he. Um, Being able to find an institution, a financial institution that will provide a credit card that doesn't invest that much in fossil fuels, that could make a big difference um, to Costco. And they could get even more customers than they already have, or members, I should say. So in closing, I believe that report will give activists in the campaign much more leverage to convince Costco, LL Bean, REI, and other companies to get rid of their dirty credit cards. And I mean, that's how we're going to convince or companies that pollute a lot, whether they're banks or other companies. We've got to hurt them where they're really going to feel it, and that's in their bank accounts. And if we can show them, you know, hey, Citibank, you're going to lose all your credit card business because there's other financial institutions that can provide credit cards that are much cleaner than yours, i.e., less climate pollution. You're going to lose Costco and all these other institutions. The banks will start to listen, we think anyway. We're also going to work on some legislative issues at the federal and state level, including legislation that, excuse me, that Iyla talked about, the polluters pay bill, which would get fossil fuel companies to start paying for damages resulting from climate amplified natural disasters. And we're also going to work on the legislation or to try to defeat the legislation that Iyla talked about to stop fossil fuel companies from getting liability waivers for damages. And then finally, we will continue to promote green and ethical banking during 2026 by attending local festivals and other events where we share information with individual bank customers and investors, how they can do good for the climate with their monies by looking for green, ethical banks to do business with. So we at Climate First, we truly believe that this climate campaign work throughout the country can surely counterbalance some of the anti-climate work that the current federal government is undertaking. So with that, we have some time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions they wanted to ask or issues to throw out there?
I just wanted to mention, I assume most people know about this, but No Kings 3 is happening on March 28th.
March 28th, No Kings 3.
And they're hoping to top 7 million from the last one.
Yeah, I would bet that they would easily get there, including having events overseas, which they had last year.
Mhm.
Let's hope for good weather and good turnout that day.
Yeah. Hope spring has sprung. Ted, we've had some discussion in our board meetings, and I wonder if maybe this would be a time when we could get some broader opinion. But one, aside from fighting the bad banks, is there do we have the opportunity to support what we're in favor of? That is clean energy. And are there organizations that we might be able to collaborate with? I know that here in New York, there is the New York Solar Energy Association, and there are local branches of that around the state. And I'm wondering if we might look at ways that we could collaborate with them. That is, to understand what the obstacles are that those pro-clean energy commercial organizations are facing. And if there's a way in which we might be able to work with the market rather than against it.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Clean Energy, Maryland Clean Energy Association or something. Um, we've worked with them a little bit. I've met their president once or twice, and I think they don't actually create clean energy or anything like that, but they support it and promote it big time. And yeah, we could do some work with them.
Because it strikes me that as the price of clean energy goes down and the price of dirty energy goes up, that if we actually have a free market, clean energy should be winning.
Well, I think it is. I mean, I see articles from time to time that despite what the current administration is doing, clean energy is still is growing all the time. Maybe not as fast. That's my understanding probably, but it's probably not as fast, but it's still I mean, the current president is trying to bring back coal, and there's just no way that's going to happen. Even the market is against that. I mean, he's trying to keep a coal plant open, even though the owner of it wants to close it. So, yeah, I think it's important to do both, Fred. I mean, just give up on the bank campaign just when we might start making progress in
Oh,
the
no,
Costco
no,
campaign, stuff like that.
wouldn't suggest that.
Oh, okay. All right. I misunderstood. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that talking about positive things and which we do now, we do more than we used to, especially with our banking campaign, which is not huge by any means, not a biggest part of our work, but we do promote ethical, clean banking, which is a positive thing.
Well, like the work that Sarah Lasoff has done on finding the clean credit card companies.
Yeah, I will send information about that out to folks. Um, yeah, it's an amazing report, and I think it could really make a difference because it hits them in their pocketbook, Citibank and others. Costco provides them with a lot of money through their credit card relationship.
With regard to that, I believe I heard, this is from McKibben, that there was more energy produced in the last year from fossil fuels than any other form of energy. But Third Act has been, they had the big Sunday in on the fall equinox, but
Right.
they're really going out. They've got 70, some maybe it's up to 80 now, working groups all over the country. And many of them are going to the local communities with this information about solar and wind. And my understanding is that a lot of the money, the cost of it is with permitting and so forth. It seemed like it was 60%, which sounded unbelievable to me. But in any case, they're working in local communities to educate public service commissions about getting rid of these high costs that would allow more people to have solar energy. So they're scurrying around all over. In I don't know how many of these working groups have been doing this, but it's apparently substantial. So solar is really, I think, going to get a boost, and we'll be hearing more about this within the year, probably, about a sharp rise, even more than it has been in solar production, energy production. I don't know that the local DMV group, well, there are 3 working groups in the DMV, and I haven't heard that a lot of that is going on. And I'm not sure why, not so much in the DMV. But anyway, so they're scurrying around all over the place in cities everywhere.
Yeah, and related to that, the state of Texas provides more wind energy, I believe, than any other state
Yeah,
in the union.
I
And
read that too. And I first read that 4 or 5 years ago.
right,
So,
and their farmers love it because they can get money. Sometimes their farms aren't as profitable as they used to be with produce and
mhm.
animals and stuff, but now they can just put up windmills and make a lot of money from that. Or they don't
There's a
put it up, they lease their land.
there's a lot of hot air in Texas.
Also, solar doesn't seem to be facing the headwinds, shall we say, that wind power is because of the antipathy of a particular person at the head of this federal administration who doesn't like his view shed impacted by wind.
Windmills, as he calls them.
Yeah, but solar has so much potential, more potential for localized distribution.
Mhm.
It's
Yep, exactly.
That's true, of course.
the bigger solar farms are dependent on having grid support and having access to the grid, but it's so much easier to distribute solar
That's right.
locally and individually. Um, so there may be, at least in the short term, maybe a lot more potential for solar than for wind, which is getting so much resistance
Mhm.
federal level.
Yep.
There,
Well,
there seems to be also, and I've heard several reports on NPR about this, about planting crops underneath the solar panels. And this is doing something better for farmers. So
yep.
I've heard there's a name for it. Forget the name. Combining solar and crops underneath.
Interesting.
Well, and distributed solar is less vulnerable to natural hazards than the grid.
Mm-hmm.
Is there scope for Climate First to take a more, how shall we say, proactive, supportive role with local
13 now.
sorry. Is there a possibility that we might in the future look to collaborating with local solar initiatives, that is, profit-making business initiatives that we might facilitate or support in a way that uses the market to meet our goals?
One word, ca capacity.
Yep.
I don't know if we have, the person power to work on that and bank campaigns and
Right.
so. But yeah, bring that up at the board meeting and we can discuss it.
Okay.
Yeah, a big, rapidly shifting factor is AI demand, and
Yep.
a lot of the data centers are beginning to look at generating their own power on site, which I gather is mostly natural gas at this point, because that's something, John, maybe you can comment on this. Natural gas um, can be implemented pretty quickly for a facility like that.
Yeah, and
But natural gas is fossil fuel. It's
Climate First is actually has just started working on the campaign in Maryland to stop a data center from being built. It's in Charles County,
Mhm.
uh, near where the P Potomac River runs into the bay. And the company wants to build a data center there because there's four aging fossil fuel plants right there,
Mhm.
and they're oil. I think they're oil, fueled by oil. And so the local folks, or many of them anyway, are fighting it because, yeah, I mean, instead of those things being shut down, now they have a reason to exist. And so these data centers, building more data centers may bring on, yeah, they're off the grid now, and that's great. Our prices don't go up anymore, but now our air is going to get more polluted in those areas.
Not to mention all the impacts on other infrastructure like water.
Yeah, which is your expertise, right?
Mhm.
So, so yeah, Alex actually attended a meeting about that, a virtual meeting about that campaign, and we've emailed about that campaign too, trying to drum up some support, some local folks in Charles County. Any other questions or issues people want to bring up? All right. Well, I think we're towards the end now. I just want to close by thanking our dedicated volunteers, donors, and board of directors for a year of powerful actions. I believe that Climate First, in partnership, underlined in partnership with many other groups, actually made some critical strides in 2025 as being part of the pushback to the outrageous actions of the US president. And then, given its campaign work in 2026, Climate First, as well as all the other groups out there that are still working on the climate, I think there is hope to save the climate, especially if the present national polling is correctly pre predicting some loss of political power for the Trump administration in the upcoming November national elections.